CEO Negada, Liste. Hello and everybody, and welcome to the first webinar for the Climate Smart Grazing Initiative that targets native cattle producers here in Oklahoma. IEC and our partners, who you'll learn about here in just a minute and hear from. We're seeking native cattle grazers interested in implementing climate smart conservation practices on lands that they actively graze on, to receive incentive payments, gain access to markets, and help create data addressing carbon emissions in the ag sector. So who are we at Intertribal Ag Council? We're a national nonprofit funded to pursue, promote ag and natural resources in Indian country for the betterment of Indian people. We offer technical assistance as well as other programming, but basically anything ag natural resources related, we can try and help with. So a few quick things on housekeeping before we get rolling here. Questions in the chat, and then we'll address those at the end. We are being recorded and live streamed, I believe, on Facebook for those unable to attend or register right now. Also, we would like the folks out there to help us promote this. So this program may not be a great fit for your operation, but somebody you know, it probably is a good fit for them. So we'd like for you to help us share this information out there and get as many people signed up as we can. So I'll kick it over to Maddie with Farm Journal Foundation, and she can explain the project.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your day and out of the field to be here. I know it's a busy time of year, so we appreciate your time. And we'll give a high-level overview of the project and open to any questions that you guys might have. We're Farm Journal Foundation. I'm the program manager for Farm Journal Foundation. And if you're not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to advance global food security, nutrition, sustainable ag, and rural economic development. So our basis is in strong farmer livelihoods, robust businesses, healthy natural environments, and nutritious and affordable food for consumers. So we're really focused on farmers and farmer voices, and that's part of the origin of this project. Achieving this vision starts with conversations and bringing all the voices to the table. And part of our background with Farm Journal Foundation and connection to IAC, which is that we were connected with Zach and Kelsey Ducheneau as farmer ambassadors. Our farmer ambassador program at Farm Journal Foundation is nationwide and growing. We have, I believe, over 30 farmer ambassadors at this point. And Zach and Kelsey were kind of some of the foundational members of that program, working to raise their voice on Capitol Hill for issues in ag, and especially issues in tribal agriculture, talking about great stewardship of their land with leaders in government, as well as policy decisions and how they affect tribal communities. So we're really grateful for that connection to Kelsey and Zach, and it's built a great foundation for this project going forward. And we're really excited to work with IAC and our other partners, ESMC and Yield Lab Institute. So just going into the project a little bit and today's agenda, we had Jeff introduce the Technical Assistance Network a little bit already. We'll provide a project overview, some overview of conservation practices that are included in the project, the incentives and the benefits, and what it means to be eligible for the project. ESMC and Yield Lab will also address their roles in the project, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So diving in, this is a USDA Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities project. You may have heard of some of these kicking off. There's quite a number of them around the country at this point. So way back in February of 2022, USDA asked for requests for proposals for these projects. And with the goal that they encourage the adoption of climate smart agricultural practices by farmers. They leverage greenhouse gas benefits of climate smart commodity production and provide direct and meaningful benefits to production agriculture. So there's $3.1 billion in all of these projects and 141 projects in 53 territories and states. They're separated into larger and smaller projects. So pool 1 has projects spending between $5 million and $100 million. Pool 2 is project spending up to $5 million to be focused on underserved farmers and ranchers. So that's us, and we're in pool 2. And our project in particular, the participating organizations are Farm Journal Foundation, Intertribal Ag Council, ESMC, and the Yield Lab Institute. So you'll hear from all of us today. And then, as I said, our grant falls under pool 2, funded at $4.9 million for 3 years. 70% of that funding goes towards direct payments and technical assistance to producers. And there's $1 million in direct funding available. So that is in the form of producer incentives that would go directly to the producers. So we are looking to enroll between 70 and 100 cattle ranchers in this pilot program. And we are in the process of enrolling and recruitment right now. So hopefully this webinar helps producers learn a little bit more about the project and help make that decision if our project is a good fit for you. We're focusing on 3 states, Florida, Montana, and Oklahoma. And that's 70 to 100 total over the whole over those 3 states. And then I will pass it over to my colleague, Stephanie. She'll go over some of the practices that we're hoping to include in this project.
All right, thank you, Maddie. So under the agreement we have with USDA, cattle ranchers are able to adopt 1 or more of this list of 9 practices that we thought were relevant to rangeland grazing management. And first of all, we hope that everybody who enrolls in our project either already is doing prescribed grazing or is willing to adopt that as their primary practice. But we also have several other practices that are eligible under this agreement. Obviously, fencing is important for that, so that's one of the practices, as is the ability to establish or expand watering facilities. And that would include the option of digging new wells if that's something that's deemed to be appropriate. We also, other practices include range planting with native and/or perennial seed species, grazing land mechanical treatment, herbaceous weed treatment, pasture and hay planting, brush management, which I gather from Jeff might be something that some Oklahoma producers will want to look at. And then the last one that's is included in our list is prescribed burning. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about what you can expect to receive from us if you do enroll in this project. First of all, as Maddie mentioned, we will be providing cash incentive payments to producers to enroll. We think we're going to have an average of about $10,000 per producer in those payments, which will help cover the cost of these new practices. We also offer the opportunity for multiple producers to work together and partner on a multiplayer grant, which would allow you and your partners to afford a more expensive infrastructure project, such as digging wells or expanding your watering facilities. We think that especially in areas where producers raise our cattle on the same land, for example, that could well work to your benefit. We are also exploring the possibility of us contracting directly with vendors to provide you the services you need, and also are looking at the possibility of signing you up for direct deposit payments. In addition to the cash option, the cash payments which you'll receive, we'll also provide you with educational materials on these new practices that I just described. And our partners at IAC will help provide you guys with technical assistance to help you plan how to implement these new practices. And then towards the end of the 3-year project, we'll be looking at how to develop opportunities for you to become a participant in carbon markets for the gains that you've made in terms of greenhouse gas benefits. And then finally, we're exploring the possibility of establishing a climate smart branded program to help you promote beef products, hopefully at premium prices. Next slide. And this is a list of the payments that would be available in Oklahoma for the practices that we've outlined. including prescribed grazing, of course, fencing, the watering facility, water wells. Next slide. And those other practices that I mentioned earlier, these are the rates at which you would be compensated, or what the cost would be, and that you'd be paying with that $10,000 payment. Next slide. And I want to mention that we're going to be working on the branded promotion under the auspices of an already existing program the Intertribal Ag Council has had in place, called the American Indian Food Program. This actually began back in 1988 under an agreement they had with USDA's Foreign Ag Service. That partnership was developed as a platform for American Indian food business to showcase their products internationally. And that also more recently includes the creation of a certified made or produced by American Indians trademark that can help segment and promote your products on the market. Next slide. And I want to describe to you what I found in terms of research that suggests that adopting a new practice like rotational grazing gives you the opportunity to not only save on some of your input costs, but also improve the weight gain of the animals that you're grazing on this land. And there was a study a couple of years back by the Economic Research Service, which found that using intensive rotational grazing does actually lower average feed costs in most parts of the country. That if you're going to be able to, as a result of these new practices, graze your animals on the land 1 or 2 months longer, rather than having to bring them in and feed them on hay bales, that also helps you in terms of direct energy savings, because it costs roughly $18 a month to feed a cow on hay, and if you are allowed that month to keep them on pasture, then that's a savings to you. And then there was a study at a university in Canada a couple of years ago that found that cattle that are raised under rotational grazing gain 2.6 pounds per day, as opposed to cattle raised under conventional grazing is 2.25 pounds a day. So that's about a 15% gain, which I think is pretty considerable. Next slide. And I also want to highlight the benefits of moving to raising more native or perennial grass species in your rangeland or pasture. Research shows that perennial warm season grasses can last 15 to 20 years or longer. So if you're using these species rather than an annual seed, then you have the possibility to save input costs in terms of the seed, the fertilizer, herbicide, and the time needed to sow those warm season annuals. And the research also shows that these perennial and native species are more drought tolerant than the annual grass species that a lot of folks are using. And so that's a benefit as well. Next slide. And there was a study done by NRCS back in 2019 that found that cattle who are grazing on pastures, which are primarily native species, gained weight more efficiently than those eating non-native species such as tall fescue and Bermuda grass. And so we're talking about eastern gamma grass, switchgrass, big blue stem, all have a higher daily weight gain than using non-native species like tall fescue. Next slide. And then on the sort of the more broader sets of benefits to these kinds of practices is that research shows that switching to rotational grazing does in fact help in terms of the greenhouse gas footprint of your operation. A study from Brazil from a few years ago found that farms who were just initiating these new rotational grazing practices, even in the first 2 years, had lower emissions than non-participating farms. And if they kept those practices in place for more than 2 years, then those benefits increased in terms of how much emissions they were able to save. The study recently at a farm in Georgia called White Oaks Pasture, and that study found that beef that was raised under rotational grazing practices on this operation in Georgia had a carbon footprint that was 111% lower. So that's a big difference, obviously, than the cattle raised on our more conventional operations. And we also know, and hopefully we can figure out a way to monetize this, that when you use rotational grazing systems, you get gains in terms of the biodiversity not just of the plants that your animals are grazing, but also the other wildlife, insects, and soil microorganisms that are part of your farm ecosystem. Next slide. Maddie.
All right, I'm gonna turn to producer eligibility a little bit. So what do you need as a producer to be eligible to participate in this project? An FSA farm number is required, and that can be achieved by completing an AD 2047 form by working with your local USDA Service Center office or FSA office. That AD 2047 is the first step towards getting a farm number if you don't already have one, and they'll guide you through the process. So some things on that form that are required are your contact information, your tax ID number, and confirmation of your citizenship status. And then if eligible, after the paperwork is completed, enrollment requires a W-2 for tax purposes. These incentives, the funding that's coming from this project is considered income, and a producer agreement would need to be signed. And then as far as working with your local USDA FSA office, like I mentioned, they'll help guide you through the next steps after farm number or AD 2047 completion. And if you already have established records with FSA, you can reach out to your local office and confirm with them that all of your paperwork is up to date, and make sure that you have all the right paperwork completed. Once that's done, IAC and Farm Journal Foundation can kind of take the reins a little bit and help with the paperwork if it's already been completed, and take a load off of your back a little bit, as long as that paperwork's completed. So first step would be reaching out to your local office to make sure everything's current. And then the USDA general terms and conditions do require that farm track, field number, producer name, and core customer ID or CCID be provided to USDA through project reporting. So as part of this project, we're Farm Journal Foundation and our other partners are required to do some reporting to USDA, and that's the kind of data that we would be sharing with the USDA. And then lastly, the USDA Service Center locator online has a map of all the Oklahoma counties and where to find your local service center. So we'll be posting this slideshow online, but you can also quickly Google the same thing and it'll pop up in your browser. You can click on your county and hopefully find your local service center. And I will pass it over to Lisa and Lizzie at ESMC now.
Thanks, Maddie. My name is Lizzie. I'm here with Lisa, my fellow project manager. We work for Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, or ESMC. Our role in this project is to quantify the carbon dioxide that is sequestered in your soil from implementing rotational grazing practice changes. Next slide. So I'm going to give an overview of ESMC as an organization and then walk you through our grazing program and associated timeline. Then we'll go over data parameters, collection and storage, and we'll give you an idea of what soil sampling looks like that's required for participation, and then sale of any project outcomes. So ESMC's mission is to incentivize farmers and ranchers to improve soil health and scale beneficial environmental outcomes. We focus on agricultural outcomes that benefit farmers and society in a collective enabling environment. So the way we do this, we are a nonprofit. We work as a public-private partnership within agricultural supply chains. So what that means for this project is that since we're focusing on beef producers, any impact units generated from the project would be sold within the beef supply chain. So what's generated from a project? We use historical data, a scientific model, soil samples, and weather data to calculate soil carbon removals. So what those removals are, and you'll hear us refer to them different ways. They could be removals, outcomes, impact units. It's different terms for essentially the exact same thing. It's the difference in the amount of carbon in the soil between the baseline year, so before you implement rotational grazing, and the project year when you do implement rotational grazing. So one impact unit or one credit is worth 1 metric ton of CO2e. So if you hear us talk about that, that's what we mean by that. Next slide. So just at a high level, I'm going to walk you through kind of the program and the timeline. So if you participate in this project, you'd be enrolling in the ESMC producer portal in the summer of this year. And really all that means is you're going to go into our map-based platform and you're going to outline your pastures and then sign a producer agreement. And you'll have support from enrollment specialists to tackle that task. Then our soil sampling partner will come out to your pastures in the fall of 2024 and conduct soil sampling. They'll do it in the first year of the project, and then they'll come back in the third year just to true up the model and make sure we're accurately modeling the soil carbon sequestration on your farm. Then you'll implement your rotational grazing practice change, and then you will have support to input your data into a logbook. So that's going to be both historical and annual data so we can model the difference. And then it goes into ESMC's hands and we take a long look through that data and we make sure that nothing looks missing or possibly entered an error. And if it does, we reach back out to you to make sure we have it right. Once we have it right, we input it into the SNAP Graze model, which is going to create those impact units or outcomes, those soil carbon removals. And that'll be generated in the spring of 2025. And then sold, and those impact unit payments will be available to producers in the spring to summer of 2025. I'm going to pass it off to Lisa on my team, who's going to kind of break down all of these steps in a little bit more detail.
Thanks. Yeah, so like Lizzie said, I'll go more in depth on the timeline that she just shared. So I'll start with, please stop my video, it's freezing on my end. So I'll start with the soil sampling. So we will take a soil sample in year 1 and year 3, and that's contracted out to a company called Earth Optics, who will come and do the soil sampling. The density will be 1 sample every 30 to 50 acres that you enroll in this program, with a minimum of 1 sample per pasture. And these will all be 12-inch deep cores. And then wherever you have deep-rooted species like alfalfa, fescue, switchgrass, they would implement a 1-meter deep core. All of this data, after they soil sample and put it in the lab, all this data will be provided to producers via their online portal in map version, as well as just the data so that you can see what's going on in your fields. And the key points that they're going to have in this soil analysis is the soil organic carbon, pH, and then bulk density. Soil sampling will take place after enrollment into our program. And then of course it'll be weather dependent depending on where you live and what the weather conditions are like. And then next slide, thank you, are the grazing data parameters that we are collecting. So all of these are producer inputted and gathered, so they are going to be individual and unique to yourself and your operation. All of these parameters are also on a per herd basis. So I'll go through them. So these again is everything that we are collecting and inputting into our logbook. So on the left, we'll start with cattle specific data, which is the number of beef cattle per herd, the type and number of other grazing animals in this herd, and then the average starting weight during the grazing season and the average ending weight of your herd of the grazing season. And then next we have acreage specific parameters, which is the number of pastures for the herd in 2024 and the total acres that it grazed in 2024. And then the last category are date specific parameters. So what date did you start grazing in 2024? What date did you finish? And then the average days grazed per pasture. And so then on the next slide, we can go through the logistics of actually collecting and inputting this data. So first is the historical data that we will need to collect. All of those parameters on the last slide, we'll still need those historically. And we do this in order to create a baseline before you implement your rotational grazing and your other grazing practices. So we're still working with our modeling partners to assess how many years of historical data we will need. However, we'll only need it once during once in the lifetime of the project during the first year of your enrollment. And you will have help with your enrollment specialists and your partners in order to put this data into the logbook. After that historical data input, the data will only need to be collected and inputted into the logbook one time annually. So it's only going to be a one time per year thing that you will have to worry about. And then in terms of how it will be collected, ESMC will be creating and sharing a logbook to all producers and enrollment specialists, and it will show all the parameters that you need. So you can just go ahead and put that in there. And again, you'll have the help of enrollment specialists and partners in order to do that. Next slide. Thank you. And just to touch on the data storage, so what happens after you enter this into the logbook and through the modeling process. This program is called EcoHarvest at ESMC, and it is an Ag Data Transparent Certified program. The producer agreement and general terms and conditions that would be signed during enrollment state that the producer owns and will continue to own your personal information and data regarding your ag management practices that are entered into the producer portal. So while you will be entering all of this into the logbook, and ESMC will be able to see this data that you input, when we share it to models or any potential buyers, all of this data that is shared is anonymized, so your personal data is safe and not being administered out to anybody else. And then the last slide, for any of those producers that are interested that would enroll in this program, if you are interested in selling any outcomes to corporates, ESMC will facilitate the sale of those outcomes. So finding buyers for any beef purchasers that are located within your supply shed. ESMC again will help facilitate that if you are interested in that, and that will happen after the modeling process and once we know what those outcomes are. And then just a reminder, Lizzie touched on this before, but the impact unit is the same thing as the soil carbon removal. So once we have that model of the metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent that has been removed from the grazing practice, that is one impact unit, and that is what would be sold to these corporates. And that's all I have for ESMC.
Thanks, Lisa. We'll pass it over to Brandon and David now at Yield Lab Institute.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. Really appreciate it. So for you all, the Yield Lab Institute, our overarching mission, and we're a nonprofit ag tech think tank based in St. Louis, is what we do is we enable entrepreneurs to revolutionize agri-food systems and sustainably provide for the world. So we have a history of working with startups and technologies in the ag tech sector. Next slide, if you would, please. So for you all, the team members you'll be interacting with from the Yield Lab Institute will be myself and David Paquette throughout the duration of the implementation of these programs and measuring and monitoring that. If you could go to the next slide, please. So to give a little bit of history about our organizations, we have quite a portfolio of developing these types of measurement and metrics, and really what our task for this project is to develop a methodology qualitatively and quantitatively through the data you report and through data that we can extract from research on how to measure the progress of all these conservation practices, how they're implemented, are there demonstrable environmental, commercial, and other outcomes, and how can we measure that? Can we measure that with our methodology and with the information that you provide and report to us? And so we have a history of doing this type of work throughout the world, doing that specifically in Latin America and Africa, and mapping ag tech ecosystems and determining outcomes for how programs and initiatives similar to this are demonstrably, linking outcomes and having data to report that. So what I'll do next is I'll pass it on to, and the next slide, please, pass it on to David, who will explain a little bit more about what we're going to be doing, how that works in the producer practice progress, and what you can expect from us. So David, if you would.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Brandon. If we can move to the next slide, please. So as Brandon said, what our role is in this process is to try to determine a correlation or lack there of a correlation between the conservation practices that are going to be put into place and financial impacts and environmental impacts that might be produced because of those conservation practices. All the information that we're going to be using is going to be made anonymous, and that will come into play a little bit later if you choose to participate in the interview process. We're going to monitor the progress across the program at the producer level. Once again, it will be anonymous and confidential at the state level and national level to compare across the different regions we're working in. And your participation will, help lay the foundation for future conservation practices in future programs. So, next slide, please. So what are we actually going to try to track? Conservation practices, prescribed grazing being the primary one, but what else are the producers doing in each region? The environmental raw data that we just discussed, what's coming out, what are the soil readings looking like, environmental output, which is the IUs that were referenced, and financial impact. Do these environmental conservation practices improve the financial well-being of the producers doing that, and does it make your life better? That's what we're trying to understand and trying to correlate all three of those together, and then see if there's any difference when the inputs, depending on the inputs. So pretty much for all of these, and can we jump to the next slide? Sorry. Pretty much for all of these, our interaction with you is going to be very limited. All the information that we'll need is going to be coming from other sources that are necessary to participate in the program. But one thing that we usually do when we're looking at different regions and different programs is we try to have interviews in a casual format to help us determine what potential blockers are for you on the ground. What are some pain points that you experience on the ground that are not being taken into consideration during these programs? Anything that you tell Brandon or I would be confidential. And when we put together any kind of report, it would be anonymous. So these interviews, once again, they're not required whatsoever. But if you do choose to participate in them, they'll help us find data to either mimic what is occurring on the ground or create our own data to measure pain points that you might have. Next slide. And this is just for transparency. You might not see this, but this is how we are going to be monitoring the impact review through the different program interventions, environmental raw data, and environmental outcomes, as well as financial. So if you do see this, that's what it is. I'm not sure if it'll be very present. Next slide, please. And that's it for us. If you do have any questions, please let us know. Happy to discuss.
Muted. Thanks, David. Thanks, Brandon. So that kind of summarizes all of the partner roles in this project. And, we're happy to take questions at this point. I'm also planning on doing a guide through our project website. So feel free to submit questions to the chat in the meantime as I bring up the website. Right, so this is where you can find a lot of the information that we just shared. This is the website based on Farm Journal Foundation organizational website. It gives an overview of the project at a high level. We do have an FAQ document that if you feel like there's some questions that you might still have, there might be some answers in there for you. And then our interest survey is here as well. That's a Google form. Pretty straightforward, does not take a lot of time. Just helps us gain a little bit more knowledge about yourself as an operation, as a producer, and some of the practices that you may be practicing already and what you're interested in doing in the future, and what kind of goals you have for your operation and your land. And then you can also find our contact information. So again, I'm Maddie. And then we're supported by the state IAC technical assistance specialists. So we have Zane in Montana, Jeff in Oklahoma, and Mackenzie in Florida. So of course, if you're based in Oklahoma, Jeff would be your main point of contact. We have a summary of the practices here as well, and a summary of our program partners. I will go into some questions that we've had in the past. And some people have wondered, I'm already enrolled in a USDA project, like EQIP or CSP. Does that mean I can participate in this project, or does it limit me from participating in other climate smart commodities projects? There's a kind of yes and no answer there. You can enroll in this project if you're already enrolled in an EQIP project, but it needs to be on a different field and a different practice. You can't overlap on practices and fields. So you could add a new practice to the field, or you could add a new field and start a different practice there as well. So we would just have to confirm that you're not already receiving funding for certain practices on certain fields. And if you have questions about that, we can talk through that with you. As far as technical assistance goes, you've been introduced to Jeff as the technical assistance specialist. So IAC will help provide the technical assistance in Oklahoma, as well as rangeland specialists consulting in the project. So producers will also have access to an extensive online resource library. That will include information about the conservation practices, economic benefits, how to implement, what does implementation look like, what's an implementation timeline look like, among other things. And that is meant to be targeted at producers in this project, but it will also serve as a resource as a whole to tribal communities, as a resource that is far-reaching. We don't mean for it to just be focused on producers, but we would like to be it to be a benefit for producers who enroll in the project as well, to give you some extra guidance and assistance. And then, are there any other requirements that you must meet to participate in this project? So we've mentioned that you must have a farm number, a field number from FSA office. And then additionally, a CPA 52 form must be completed. This form assesses the environmental and cultural impact of implementing a new practice. Rotational grazing is not subject to a CPA 52, so that can easily be implemented without any environmental review or anything like that. And then those additional practices that we mentioned earlier would just have to be reviewed for their environmental and cultural impact. And then as far as market access, we went over a little bit of the carbon market access and the American Indian Foods label, but just wanted to reiterate that the American Indian Food Program is a program of IAC, and it serves as a platform for American Indian food businesses to showcase their products and share tribal cultures with the world. So you would have access to that made and produced by American Indian trademark and through your participation in this program. And then we'll provide you with marketing potential for your beef through national and international exposure. Lastly, what other kind of information might you need to provide for the project? And one of the goals of this project is to help build a better understanding of Native American agriculture practices and create pathways to enable tribal producers to participate in USDA conservation programs. So if you learned a little bit from Yield Lab and ESMC about the kind of data that they would be looking for, and ultimately that will help serve as a communication tool to inform USDA of ways to provide better support and assistance to Native American producers in the future as a whole. And then we'll also have a peer-to-peer network built into this project as well, where you'll be able to engage with other producers, whether that's in your state, within your community, within your tribe, or in another state. And there might be some interesting points of conversation there to share on how your practices differ or are the same across the states involved in the project. And then that will hopefully go into the future and be incorporated into a network that you have as a result of your participation in this project. And then let's see, I see another question in the chat here. Okay, so Summer asks, sorry if I missed this, how are you verifying that cattle is the primary form of business income? Asking on behalf of a small farm where sometimes cattle is the primary source of income, sometimes not. So our goal is to serve both small producers and larger producers. We don't want that to be a limiting factor. And we would just need to have more of a conversation with you about what that looks like for your business. I don't, that's a question on the producer survey, but if you have to answer yes or no, we're definitely open to talking through that with you and what that looks like for your business. So please don't let that be a deterrent if you're unsure of what that means for you and your operation. and see if we have any other questions. We can hang out for a couple minutes and see if any more questions roll through. Looks like questions might be slowing down right now. As I mentioned, we'll be putting the webinar online. ISC will be posting it on their social platforms. It's being streamed on Facebook right now, so it'll be accessible on ISC's Facebook, and then it will also be posted on Farm Journal Foundation's YouTube channel. I think we can wrap up at this point. If you have any further questions, I'll share some contact information in just 1 second. Get my screen shared again. So some contact information I mentioned are farmjournalfoundation.org/tribal agriculture. Please feel free to share this with your friends, families, and peers. And then Jeff, who introduced us, kicked us off, based in Oklahoma. He's a technical assistant specialist in the Eastern Oklahoma region. We have Quentin as well, based in the Southern Plains region. And then myself, Maddie Skelly. You can reach out to any of us if you have more questions or are looking for some more information. Would like to thank everybody for their time today. Again, we know it's a busy time of year and everyone's trying to get out in the field and do some work, get things started for the spring. So we appreciate your time today. And please feel free to reach out with any additional questions. And that's all for today. Thank you.